Welcome to this study. Today, we're diving into a full summary of a massive, highly detailed presentation from the channel Living_Pardes. A link is below in the description box, so you can totally check out their original work for yourself. And please remember, prayers for the Watchmen channels are very much appreciated, so give a hype and a like, please. We're going to be unpacking a deeply complex theory today that essentially attempts to map ancient scriptural texts directly onto our modern geopolitical world. And what makes this particular framework so fascinating is literally just the sheer scale of its ambition. It takes apocalyptic warnings that were penned thousands of years ago and overlays them seamlessly onto today's map, suggesting that our current global conflicts were actually anticipated down to the exact year and the specific proxy armies involved. It's a really dense, provocative structure, and we're going to look closely at the exact historical and mathematical arguments the source brings to the table. We open our detective story by neutrally exploring the source's central and honestly pretty bold claim. Have traditional interpretations entirely missed the mark? For generations, scholars have looked at the apocalyptic visions in Daniel and Revelation as either completely separate events or maybe just broadly allegorical warnings about human nature. But the channel proposes that a crucial, missed connection between the ancient beasts of Daniel chapter 7 and the later writings in Revelation actually holds the master key to decoding what's happening right now in modern global events. To keep us from getting lost in the weeds of this dense historical timeline, here's our roadmap. We'll be looking at the beast from the sea, the traits of Persian kings, the mystery of the seven heads, the 42-month mathematical prophecy, the earth beast, and finally the identity of the eighth king. All right, Section 1, the beast from the sea, bridging Daniel 7 and Revelation 13. Our first major clue lies in the sea, specifically how this theory links prophetic beasts across two completely different eras. The foundational theory here relies on a really specific mathematical alignment. If you count the heads on Daniel's four ancient beasts, so that's one on the lion, one on the bear, four on the leopard, and one on the terrifying fourth beast, they equal exactly 7 heads. The source argues that this perfectly matches the single, seven-headed beast described centuries later in Revelation 13. The implication here is huge for this framework. Revelation isn't presenting a brand new, disconnected vision. Actually, it's a composite amalgamation of Daniel's earlier warnings, proving there's a direct, shared identity across time.
Moving right along to Section 2, Traits of the Persian Kings, identifying the animal features.
The study proposes that this composite beast actually draws its strength in ways that perfectly mirror specific ancient Persian conquests. According to their historical framework, it's like a giant puzzle. The beast's lion mouth, that represents King Cyrus. Cyrus was widely viewed as a messianic figure for famously allowing captive Jews to return home, so the beast speaks like a false herald of peace. The bear's feet represent Cambyses II, a ruler who only managed to conquer tough territories like Egypt by forming strategic alliances with Arab tribes in the Sinai Peninsula, which mirrors the beast's geographic footing. And finally, the leopard represents Darius I. He was a king who used cunning tactics and intense religious fervor to aggressively spread the strict, monotheistic religion of Zoroastrianism across the known world.
Which brings us to Section 3, identifying the 7 heads, decoding the harlot and the hills.
The study leans on a very specific text from Revelation 17 to describe a profound future conflict. It reads, "The waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. And the 10 horns will hate the harlot, make her desolate." But before we can grasp the massive scale of this conflict, the source insists we really have to identify exactly who or what this text is referring to. The specific wording, a harlot sitting on many waters, is literally the key to their entire decoding process. Now, this is absolutely crucial to understand. The source defines this entity purely historically and spiritually. In biblical literature, relying on foreign empires for protection instead of divine providence and adopting foreign gods were often described allegorically as harlotry. Therefore, this framework suggests the woman represents the ancient city of Jerusalem and its historical political alliances. And we really want to stress that within this theological framework, this represents ancient structural alliances. It is completely detached from making any kind of judgment on any modern populations or individuals living there today. So how does this build a continuous historical timeline? Well, the channel suggests the 7 heads represent 7 literal empires that took possession of Jerusalem over the centuries. Tracking history chronologically, we see a clear progression of conquering empires: Assyria, Egypt, Babylon, Medo-Persia, and Greece. That brings us to Rome as the 6th kingdom, which was the one currently reigning during the Apostle John's time when the text was written. Following the timeline forward into the future from John's perspective, the source identifies the Islamic Caliphate as the massive seventh head to eventually conquer the land. And this is where it gets incredibly detailed. The presentation actually suggests that the seventh head, the Islamic Caliphate, is essentially a religious and cultural evolution of that ancient Persian empire we discussed a minute ago. By closely comparing the ancient Persian state religion of Zoroastrianism with Islam, the channel highlights some pretty striking historical parallels. They argue the spiritual DNA was carried forward. I mean, think about it. Both systems have a single supreme deity, a founding prophet visited by an angel of light, a strict mandate of 5 daily prayers tied to the sun's position, a post-death judgment involving literal scales and a bridge, and very specific heavenly rewards for the faithful. The source uses all these parallels to argue that the cultural and religious structure of the beast that once was had effectively resurfaced under a brand new name. Let's dive into Section 4, the 42-month prophecy, calculating the dates. Okay, let's walk through the math here, because it's fascinating to see how they pinpoint specific modern dates. They calculate the prophetic 42 months mentioned in the texts using the Julian calendar, which was the standard during John's time. In that calendar, 1 month averages exactly 30.437 days. Multiply that by 42, and you get 1,278.4 days. Then they apply the biblical day-for-year principle, a supercommon prophetic interpretation where 1 day equals 1 literal year in history. The source explicitly anchors the start of this 1,278-year countdown to AD 688. Why 688? Because historically, they identify it as the first full year of construction for the Dome of the Rock on the Temple Mount, which establishes the seventh head's literal, physical footprint. And guess what? If you add those 1,278 years to AD 688, you land precisely on the year 1967. The channel highlights this as an incredibly pivotal historical moment. Within their framework, 1967 isn't just some random date. It is the exact year of the Six-Day War, when control of Jerusalem was returned to Israel. For the source, this specific mathematical alignment marks the literal, prophesied end of the seventh head's absolute reign over the city. It fulfills the mathematical countdown to the very year. Section 5. The Two-Horned Earth Beast, the Divisions of Islam.
But the mystery doesn't just end there, right? We've got to look at the second beast mentioned in Revelation 13, the beast arising from the earth. The study interprets this entity, which is described as having 2 horns like a lamb but speaking like a dragon, as representing the historical development of Islam itself. The channel points out that shortly after the founder's death, the religion suffered a massive schism. It split into 2 distinct powers or horns, the Sunni branch and the Shia branch. The source maps this perfectly to the biblical metaphor, suggesting they both grew from the exact same single, outwardly unified source, like an innocent lamb, but ultimately exerted their global influence with the fierce, aggressive authority of a dragon.
And finally, Section 6, the 8th king revealed, modern geopolitics.
This all culminates in the big reveal regarding the identity of the mysterious 8th king. The text states, "The beast who once was and now is not is an 8th king." The channel points out a truly fascinating interpretive detail here. This specific verse completely bypasses the 7th head, the Sunni-led Islamic Caliphate. Instead, it points directly backward to the beast that once was. And since we established earlier that the beast from the sea holds the traits of the ancient Persian Empire, the source identifies the 8th king as ancient Persia reborn. In modern geographical and political terms, that points squarely at modern-day Shia-led Iran.
The source claims that this historical framework perfectly explains the incredibly complex headlines we're seeing right now. By linking ancient Persia's mandate to modern Iran, they view today's proxy wars not just as isolated political disputes, but as the literal ongoing manifestation of this ancient prophecy. The channel points directly to Iran's modern geopolitical alliances and their extensive funding of regional groups like Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis. In this theological framework, this is the modern fulfillment of the scriptural beast organizing its allied horns to surround and turn against the historical alliances of Jerusalem.
So as we wrap up this complex study, we've walked through ancient empires, mathematical calendar conversions, and the shifting of geopolitical powers over millennia. It really leaves us with a provocative thought to ponder. Regardless of your personal worldview, the channel presents a remarkably detailed, full summary of how these ancient texts might map to our current reality. So what do you think? How deeply does ancient history truly influence the headlines we see today? Are we merely watching political struggles over land and resources? Or are we watching ancient, prophesied cycles meticulously repeat themselves on the world stage?
Thank you so much for walking through this detailed timeline with me today.